So you might remember that last fall I did some end of the season maintenance on my boat. But there was one thing I didn't do. Let's talk about why.
Hey everybody, this is Captain Frank with the Ship's Log, and we are back on the boat today. And we are going to do just a little bit of minor spring maintenance. This is something that I do every year around this time, just to make sure that my boat is ready to go for the season. Now, you might remember that back in the fall, back around October or so, I did some fall maintenance. I changed the oil in both engines, as well as the generator oil filters. I changed the fluid in the transmissions, and did a few other things. One thing that I did not do then is change my fuel filters. So that's what I'm going to do today. Now, you might be asking, why did you do all that work and you didn't change your fuel filters? Well, there's actually a reason why I changed the oil and the transmission fluid in the fall, and I actually wait until spring to do my fuel filters. Let's start with the oil and transmission fluid. Many of you may know that when you use an engine, as you run the engine, your oil actually builds up, of course, dirt, and it also has the tendency to become somewhat acidic. Now, of course, they do have additives in the oil to help prevent the acid buildup. So, and most of your newer oils, especially your synthetic oils, are pretty good at helping to combat that. And of course, we have oil filters to clean the dirt out and so on and so forth. But the fact is over a period of time, it does become somewhat acidic, and that can actually be bad for your engine. So, in the fall, when I change the oil, the reason I do that is because I know that while I do use my boat in the wintertime, I don't use it nearly as much as I do in the summertime. So I don't want that dirty, potentially acidic oil, or maybe even oil that has some moisture buildup in it. I don't want that just sitting in the engines all winter long, potentially causing some damage. So I put nice fresh oil in there in the fall. Of course, I do run the boat a little bit in the wintertime, but it's with clean oil and it's just not sitting there. I think it's better for the engine that way. So that's why I do those fluid changes in the fall. Now, fuel filters, different thing. We all know, again, if you're not using your boat much in the wintertime, that fuel is just sitting in the tank. Now, of course, it is recommended that you do put a good quality fuel stabilizer in there to help keep the fuel stable. So that's one thing you can always do, and that's one thing that I do. But again, fuel sitting for a few months over the winter months, that can actually, again, start to break the fuel down. You actually can potentially get moisture in the fuel, and of course we know that when that has happened, then it doesn't burn very well, and it could potentially cause you issues when you're trying to use your boat on spring. So what I do is, the first thing I do is I actually run the boat a couple of times. I take it a couple of times out in the early spring before I change the fuel filters out. And what I do is once I've run it a couple times, I then change the filters. If there is any water that's been trapped in the canister there, I can get rid of that. If there's been any muck or dirt or anything that maybe had kind of gathered in the tanks over the winter, I'm getting rid of that. I'm starting out my season with fresh filters and hopefully, of course, really good fuel, and we're good to go from that standpoint. So that's kind of my thought process. I can't say any of this has been scientifically proven, but it has worked well for me and it seems to make sense. So let's talk about this. Now, my boat, again, it's old school. It actually uses the old school canister type filter. So you actually have a canister, which has a seal, and there is a filter element that goes inside. Here's a new seal. So as you'll see, when I take it off, I'll unscrew the canister. I will remove the old element. There's going to be fuel in there as well. I'm going to make sure that I get rid of that, because if there's any water in the bottle, any water in the bottom of this canister, I want to make sure I get rid of that. These things are designed to that water will kind of collect at the bottom, and when you change that element, you get rid of that. So I'll pour that out. So you need to have some type of a fuel safe container to put that old fuel in. You replace the canister, or replace the filter, I should say. You make sure you have a good new seal on there. Make sure you pull that old seal off when you take it off, and then you screw it back on and you're good to go. So I'm going to do that with both engines, and then that's pretty much all there is to it. Now, of course, some of your newer boats are not going to have this type of fuel filter. They're going to have the spin-on type that looks very much like newer oil filters do. So yours may very well have that type, but the same rule applies. You want to make sure that you get rid of it in a safe manner. So let's get down in the engine compartment and let's get started. Okay, so we're down in the bilge here where the engines are. And fortunately, it's not real tough to get to the location for the fuel filter for the starboard engine. It's actually right there where you can see it. The port engine is actually on the other side, so it's a little bit more difficult. You actually have to change it out without really being able to see it, but it's not too bad. Okay, so here is the filter, or I should say the filter canister. I'm just going to unscrew that. And of course you want to be very careful, because you know it does have fuel in it. You don't want to spill any fuel in the bilge. So the canister comes off easy, but the element might want to stick onto the fitting there. So you just kind of easily pull that off. And there you go. Now I have a gas can here that I am going to dump this into. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take the filter element out, let it drain in there, and looking at it, it doesn't really look too bad, which is great, because I surely don't want to get to a point where my fuel filters look really dirty. So now that it's drained, put that in the box. I am going to take, also if you look in there in the fuel, it doesn't really look like I have any water in the bottom either, which is great. Again, a little bit of sediment there, but not a lot. So pour that here. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that I wipe all that sediment out of the bottom there to make sure I've got it all out. It's nice and clean. I'm going to put my new seal on here. Okay, now that I've got my seal on there, I'm going to put my filter element back in. Now, as you screw this back on, you want to make sure that, number one, your seal does not get out of place. That needs to stay right there where it is. And you also want to make sure that this rubber opening right here on the filter element is facing up, because that's what interfaces with the fuel line coming down. And then you screw it back on and make it nice and tight, and then you're good to go. So let's do that. Gonna put this into place and screw that back on. You don't want to over tighten it, but of course you do want to make sure that it's snug, hand tightened. Check to make sure that the seal is not popping out one side or the other. And that's all there is to it. So we're going to go ahead and do the one on the other engine, and then we'll be ready. Okay, so we are all done. Got the fuel filters on both engines changed, and of course, anytime you're in the bilge, might as well go ahead and check some other things out as well. even though it hasn't been that long since I've been down in here, I'm here now, might as well check it out. Oil level in both engines was fine, generator's fine, transmission fluid was fine, but I did notice that I needed to add some fluid for my trim tab. So I went ahead and did that, and we are good to go. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and crank the engines up just to make sure everything is good. Obviously, if you have just the spin-on fuel filters, it's a lot easier. Spin the old one off, spin the new one on, make sure that it's hand tightened, and just make sure you don't spill any fuel in the process. But anyway, let's go ahead and get the engine started. Now, as you can imagine, we just finished changing the fuel filter, and we put an empty fuel canister back on the engine. So it's probably going to take a little longer than normal to get started, because we got to kind of get that fuel going back through the line, fill that canister up so that it can go on to the engine itself. So, but shouldn't take too long, so let's give it a shot. All right, that was the port engine. Let's give the starboard engine a shot. So anyway, that's how easy it is to change the fuel filters. The most difficult thing on some boats might simply be getting to the filter. I know some boats the filter's in a difficult spot, but pretty easy job, something you can easily do yourself. Leave me some comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are on my timing of how I do that, or how and when I do that. And let me know how you do it. Especially if you do something different, I would love to hear about that. So until next time, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you haven't already done so. Share it with as many people as you can, and we will see you next time.